This is a video about death of the author, something you've almost certainly gotten wrong and used the wrong way. It's also a video about Death of the Author, a brilliant novel that you need to read. That's right, we're doing multiple things today. Cheers. Welcome back everybody to me talking about books, and not just any books, but Death of the Author, the new novel by Nnedi Okorafor, which came out a couple of weeks ago, and that's what we'll be talking about today. Before we move on, I almost didn't do this video because I felt awkward, because I, look like this right now because of an accident. And then I read the book and decided, no, this is actually perfect, because doing dumb shit is kind of part of what this is about. Anyway, with that out of the way, we'll do the usual thing. I'll give you a quick synopsis of what this is about, what you need to expect before you can start, or what you should know so you can, actually enjoy the thing. And then I'll drink some more beer. You go and read the book if you haven't yet, because, you really should. And then I will start talking about detailed things. We'll do we'll be failing at analyzing this book. Sort of, kinda. We'll see. All right, ready? Well then, let's get going. As already mentioned, Death of the Author is a novel by Nnedi Okorafor, and I really hope I pronounce the name at least not too much wrong. Anyway, the novel is, multiple things at the same time. It follows an author, Zelu, who writes a novel, a science fiction novel, Rusted Robots, and what happens once that novel becomes hugely successful, and how that impacts her life and the lives all around her. It also includes the novel Rusted Robots, and that is a science fiction novel about robots trying to come to terms with, possibly the end of the Earth and the end of the world in the far, far future, somewhere in Nigeria. And the way these two stories are intertwined, possibly with a third structural element, is what this book is all about. So you have a science fiction novel, a full science fiction novel. You also have a full, more or less near future to right now, more realist fiction novel in a lot of ways, and they are independent. I can't speak today. They are mixed up with each other. That's the point. All right, go read the thing. It's really, really, really good, and I am not trying to say complicated words for now. I'm going to drink beer, and then we'll talk about details. All right, let's go and talk about what this all does, because from here on out, there will be slight spoilers. All right, let's talk about the first part, and that is the structure. This novel is structured in an interesting way because, what I already said, there are two main storylines, that being Zelu's storyline as a writer, and what happens after publishing a successful book, all of those kind of things. And then there is, of course, the storyline of Rusted Robots. There is, however, a third element, because Zelu's story is told in two different ways. One is a third-person story describing what Zelu does and so forth, and one is a collection of first-person interview snippets with members of her family, friends, and so forth, that are sort of interwoven with the rest, giving us outside perspectives of what is going on in Zelu's life at the time. This is a very important structural element, and we'll come back to that near the end of this video. The sci-fi part, Rusted Robots, is of course also told in first person by Ankara, the robot. So those are the three important parts when it comes to the structure. Now let's talk about the next part, and we will be talking about it a lot, but I need to start with a quick introduction, and that is, we'll be talking about intersectionality, we'll be talking about certain aspects of Zelu's personality and so forth. And I'm a white boy from Germany. I have no personal experiences that are relatable to a lot of what is happening in this book. There are some things that I can, understand and speak for in a more confident way, and that is when the book is talking about disability, when it's talking about academia, that kind of stuff. So what I will be doing is I'll list up all these things and how they are coming up, and then I'll do a quick digression into the things that are dealt about in that specific aspect of disability, to showcase how deep this novel goes with all these different facets of, well, a personality at the end of the day. And then we'll be returning to, well, structural stuff and all the other things that I try to say in this video that's going to be way too long and way too complex, and I will never ever finish it in any meaningful way. All right, ready with that? Then let's talk about one final thing, and that is, of course, Death of the Author. Death of the Author is an essay by Roland Barthes, a famous French critic who, well, died in unfortunate circumstances. And it's also probably mostly the most misused thing on the internet and all around. It's an essay that talks about literary criticism and how much authorial intent should be taken into consideration or should be ignored. It is also obviously the thing that everyone uses to give themselves the right to still read Orson Scott Card, J.K. Rowling, or any other atrocious author. But we will not go into that. That is wrong. That is completely misreading what Roland Barthes was doing in that essay. The book, Death of the Author, does deal with that in a concrete example at the beginning, and it also does deal with the question of the relationship between artist, and, well, the appreciation of art, so in this case, author, book, and text and reader, throughout the whole thing. And we'll come back to that near the end. I just wanted to point that out. Also, go read the fucking essay. It's cheap. Well, it's not cheap. It's short, and it's free on the internet. You can find it. You can read it. It's worth it. You will hopefully understand some things. And while you're at it, go also read What is an Author by Michel Foucault. That's also worth reading. And all of that out of the way, let's talk about Zelu's life and Zelu's personality and intersectionality. So, intersectionality is something that you may have encountered before. It means that all of our well, different struggles in the world are intersecting on all kinds of lines, because, say, things like marginalization can happen to you because of your gender, your race, well, racial background, ethnicity, because of a disability, because of, well, which class you belong to, economic class you belong to. All of these things are avenues of discrimination and avenues in which we struggle for recognition and so forth. That's just something that is out there. And this is important. I would go one step further for, well, this specific video when we talk about intersectionality, because when we talk about people are a mosaic, or I guess the term that I want to go back to is, well, we are a collection of different aspects of our personality that all make up who we are. And depending where we are and who is looking at us, who is talking to us, different aspects of said collection of personality will be, well, more foregrounded, more backgrounded, ignored, more important, and so forth. So what we will be doing here is beyond just, the major big ones of gender, of ethnicity, of immigrant status, all of that stuff. We will also add some other personality aspects that are important for that specific role. I want you to think of this as, say, the splinters of glass in a kaleidoscope that, depending on what you do and depending who looks through that, the image that we see of a personality will be different, but they will always be interesting and possibly beautiful, a work of art. Take that to the side. Yes, well, we'll be fancy today. Now, that out of the way, let's look at all the different complex aspects that we can see in Death of the Author and the life of Zelu that the realist part of the novel does deal with before we move further on. There is the first part, which is Zelu's background as a Nigerian American living in America as the daughter of Nigerian immigrants who moved to America, studied there, and well, worked there. This is the first big identity. What is interesting and important here is, however, that one once again can be broken down further, with her mother being Yoruba and her father being Igbo. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And how their specific traditions, regional tribal traditions from Nigeria, still influence how the family behaves and acts in America. That is an important first step. Obviously, being from Nigeria, being Nigerian American, in that second generation means that there is also cultural elements of growing up in America that are tied into that. It's already a very, very complex kind of thing. And when you tie to that, of course, the fact that being from Nigeria, people who don't know anything beyond that would just categorize that family as, black in the American term, and possibly ascribe all the broad things that under, white supremacy people would always assume of black people in general. We can see the next sort of conflict or fracture in that identity of being seen either as Nigerian by people who know that Zelu is from Nigeria, or being seen as half Igbo, half Yoruba by Nigerians who know about the details of the family, or being assumed to be either Igbo or Yoruba by people who don't know more details, or being seen as Afro-American by people who know nothing about it. Those are already different facets, different perspectives woven into that are all sort of in that personality. So that's the first big conflict here, and that's one that I don't know much about, but the idea of what it means to be an immigrant or being perceived as an immigrant in America is obviously a huge issue right now. It's obviously one that we can see play out in real time right now, but we also can see how that these internal family dynamics are very much an important part here, because these roles are constantly being negotiated between members of the family, other people around the family, friends, and so forth. And that constant negotiation, I think, is an important element here. So that's the first part that we see. The next part is, of course, Zelu is a woman. And being a woman, also living under patriarchy, brings a lot of issues. Being taken for less, being marginalized, being pushed around by dudes who think that simply by virtue of having a dick, they are somehow privileged in all kinds of ways. That obviously also plays into the whole opening chapter of Zelu's life, with the flashbacks around her work, teaching as an adjunct, being seen as black, being seen as disabled or having a disability, and being seen as a woman by, white male privileged students who assume that gives them rights to, run around her in all kinds of ways. Class obviously also plays a role in there. That whole scene is one masterclass in what Bourdieu meant, if you want to look at it when it comes to class distinction and all that stuff, right? So that's the next big part. It also means that there are obvious fears around, being around men. The opening scene that we see in in the first interview scene is one of those, where Zelu, having had some form of hookup with a dude, is then basically stalked by that dude and wants to get away from him, and her sister has to interpose herself. But that is, once again, that's part of that once again personality, where being seen as a woman does lead to all kinds of consequences, and some of them are obviously pretty fucking bad, because we live under patriarchy in a lot of ways. I mean, I live on top of it, obviously, but you know what I mean. So that's the next important fragment here. Now we want to move on to another one. That is the disability part. Zelu is paraplegic and after an accident, and is wheelchair bound. And that leads to a lot of things. Once again, being seen as having a disability or chronic illness comes with all kinds of consequences. And the first part that we need to talk about here is being seen as having a disability, because while there are a lot of chronic illnesses and disabilities, and all of them are obviously incredibly marginalizing in all kinds of ways, there's a difference between the kind of disability you may have that everyone notices as soon as you enter a space, and the one that is that only people who already know you are aware of. Say, if you're in a wheelchair, if you're blind like me and use a stick, you enter a room, everyone is aware of the fact that you are different, that you are other. And that aspect of your personality will definitely be one of the big ones through which any encounter in that situation will be filtered. If you are, have diabetes or anything of the sort, that will obviously be something that will come up if you talk to people, if you, and they are aware of it. But until then, that first encounter will probably not be already impacted by that. So I just wanted to bring that specific part up because while, any experience of a disability is unique in its own way, I think that sort of categorization makes a lot of sense before we move further down this specific aspect. Because being seen as having a disability, it means being seen as different and obviously in a lot of ways as lesser. And that is not necessarily out of, disgust or anything of the sort. It can also be, depending on when we're talking about family or friends in a lot of ways, that can also mean come from a position of love, come from a need to protect, feeling that you need to be there for people, need to maybe prevent them from doing further harm to themselves by being, overly confident. Because what happens with specifically the topic of disability is, of course, that people with disabilities are often very much overestimated or underestimated. Mostly underestimated when it comes to what they can actually do, and overestimated when it comes to how good people are coping, how well people are coping with their role as a person with a disability. Which obviously leads to the term being disabled, which I would say is, harmful in itself if you think about the larger definition of the word. And words mean a lot, and words are important in this regard. There is obviously a next step here, and I think this colors once again the experience of this book. One way that having a disability is interesting is that as a person with a disability, we lose agency. Losing agency is always bad. All of these roles that we've spoken about mean that in some situations we lose an aspect of agency. One way we can regain forms of agency is through technology. Technology is a whole other hornet's nest that this book does touch upon in a lot of ways, both with, assistive technology that is specifically for people with specific disabilities. In this case, Zelu's not full exoskeleton, but the exos for her legs, but also with something like the AI assistant software that plays such a large role in the plot line. Those are things that can really help people with disabilities to regain a form of agency. Using the autonomous vehicle taxi service in the novel is another such aspect. And while a lot of these elements, especially the autonomous cars and the AI assistant thing, are stuff that is currently very much suffering from, being run under capitalism with all kinds of problems by incredibly problematic people, what the novel shows in some, nuance, I think, is that for someone in a role with a disability, these can be incredibly empowering tools. Being able to take a taxi without having to ask anyone to accompany you, without having to ask anyone to help you out with friends, or with being left alone and physically helpless, or much less able to defend yourself in case a taxi driver decides to attack you. Those are real fears that someone like Zelu, that's where we have the intersection between being a woman and being having a disability would come in, has probably more fears that I have. I'm more on the side that when I need to go somewhere, I really don't always want to have to, rely on the helpfulness of friends or family and feeling that, I'm being a weight for them. But so I would totally use autonomous taxis if they were available. And it's to Nnedi Okorafor's big credit that she does, in fact, use the disability thing to look into that technology and into how technology does change meaning if we, depending on how our personality, which part of who we are, of our persona we are talking about. And that, I think, is an important aspect here. The other part is, of course, that being seen as someone with a disability, even by friends, even by family, can mean that that can lead to a very stifling situation where everyone tries to prevent you from doing certain things, even though you are very confident that you can actually do them. And if you do that, despite everyone else telling you to not do that, and something does go wrong, even if it's completely outside of your control, everyone will blame you and tell you afterwards, "Oh, we told you so, and now look what happened. Now we have to help you out of a situation that was totally expectant," and so forth. And I think this is the next important part, because while being seen by people as something that you are not necessarily actually are, will lead to them having expectations. And if you don't fulfill, if you exceed those expectations, they may or may not support you. But if you go against those expectations and don't bring certain levels of overwhelming success with you, that will very much be read against you in all kinds of ways. And I think that's one of the big elements that this book does so well, describing that specific aspect of how it is to live with a disability. Even if you are in a supportive network of lots of friends and family, which Zelo in a way is, but with all the intersections of, the Nigerian-American background, with all of these elements in there, a lot of this can become a very toxic situation nevertheless. So, moving on from this sort of smaller digression, where I hope I have shown that from what I can say, all of these different nuanced aspects of a personality, of life experience are dealt with a lot of detail. Let's talk about 2-3 final ones before we move into the next stage. Let's talk about academia first. Zelo is, at the beginning of the story, an adjunct professor in the humanities. And, that's a shit situation for all kinds of reasons. The humanities are under siege in a lot of ways. Being an adjunct is a result of the humanities being constantly defunded because we live in a very specific paradigm under capitalism that does that. Being, once again, if this intersects with being a person with a disability, being a person of color, all of these things, once again, are intersecting in a situation that is already under other external pressures, which is, why intersectionality is so important. If you want to read more about that kind of stuff, I don't know, read some of the books by Sarah Ahmed and you'll get an understanding of that specific aspect of being a, person with a disability, a person of color with a disability in the humanities, for example. But once again, this is important because this comes once again with different expectations. We expect people in academia to, if they don't have a certain academic titles, they are seen as lesser. If they do have those titles, people will still expect you to do something else afterwards because, doing creative writing, being a philosopher, having a degree in philosophy or anything is not seen as doing a real job. And that once again comes in to the conversations that Zelo has with her family, where then again the expectation to have a degree is kind of tied to their background as half Igbo in this case, right? All of these, once again, intersect in a lot of ways, which leads us to the next aspect, which is being an artist. Because being an artist is a very specific role that comes with all kinds of expectations, misunderstandings, and so forth. We expect artists to do a lot of things. Usually, that's not what being an artist is at the end of the day, right? We have the idea of the tortured genius. We have the person who does a normal day job, and then besides that, they are maybe allowed to do some art because we don't expect art to be something that is adequately remunerated in any way, shape, or form. But we also expect artists to be somewhat, different, outside their geniuses, or at least slightly different. And that's weird because at the end of the day, they are still human with all the human flaws that we can bring with us, with all the human needs that we can bring with us. Artists want to be just normal people in a lot of ways, and being an artist, and this is sort of where this kind of flows into the next aspect, especially being a successful artist, being a artist in the public eye, comes with fame, comes with all kinds of other things that then once again can influence both the person and can influence how the person is seen. Once again, these are all different aspects that are constantly negotiated depending on who's doing the presenting, who's doing the looking, who's in which situation we are, and so forth. Which brings us to, once again, that final point, which is the public figure. Because the public figure is something that happens to some of us for all kinds of reasons, and being a successful artist, in this case, makes you a public figure. Which means you're under a lot of scrutiny, sometimes for the correct reasons, sometimes for the wrong reasons. Because being a public figure is twofold. It's a description of a role that you have, but it's also a role that you need to perform. It comes with expectations by the large public. It also comes with very clear monetary expectations in a lot of ways. If you are an author, your publisher will have expectations like, running your own social media, doing all of these kind of things, which are suddenly not just expectations for public figures, but turn you slowly into a product. And this is very well, that whole intersection of all these different elements is wonderfully shown in the scene where Zelo is interviewed by the journalist and uses her exos to walk in, and is then asked if she does not, by virtue of this, basically fail her role as a public figure and as a role model for people with disabilities, because obviously she's in a privileged situation where she can afford, or it is used as a test subject for these exoskeletons, for this exoskeleton, and others can't afford that, which then obviously takes away personhood. This is the important element here, right? Because it's not Zelu the human who decides to do that because it qualitatively improves her life. Suddenly that doesn't matter because Zelu the public figure has to conform to certain expectations. And that, I think, wonderfully explains how all of that works, because chances are that if not other aspects of, her person, that kaleidoscopic image of her personality would not also be seen there if she were, an already much more established author, if she were, actually seen as a man, if she were seen as white. We don't know that in that situation. Those are hypotheticals, but it's safe to say that those would have changed if she had written something not science fiction, not genre fiction, but something considered literary fiction. That would also have changed. All of these things do change the perception of a public figure and how they are supposed to act or not to act. And not doing that, constantly renegotiating that role, is something that is the underlying thing here. Now let's talk about the next part, which is, once again, the art. See, there is a novel in here. The novel is, of course, Rusted Robots, a story about an AI and a disembodied AI and a robot, a humanoid robot, having to negotiate what it means to be a person and so forth in Nigeria. There's, after climate change, humanity is gone, but the Earth is once again under threat by other robots. There's a lot of metaphor in there, and you can read all of that. And this is something I don't want to do here for numerous reasons. The book is highly successful, and it gets optioned into a movie and gets turned into a movie and so forth. Now, what I want to talk about here is the role of a text as both a piece of art and as a product, as a commodity, because that's the next big part, right? The artist produces a piece of art, that being produces a text, and that text giving meaning to readers. That's what makes a text a piece of art in one way or another. And it does, first of all, not necessarily matter what kind of meaning that text can give, because that's out of the control of the author. That's kind of where, the idea of death of the author kind of comes in. If it gives meaning, that's great. However, a text is also a commodity. It is published by a publisher that wants to have, make money. It is optioned, turned into a movie. The movie, while also being a piece of art in one way or another, will also give meaning to a lot of people. But it is also a commodity that has to be sold. And to be sold, it has to be, adapted according to the market. In this case, all the very Africa-specific, Nigeria-specific elements are stripped. It's fully Americanized because that's still the target market for large movies. And that takes, obviously, a lot of agency away from the original author into someone else. And that interpolation, that intersection, that overlap between being a piece of art while also being a commercial commodity that the original author may see as a piece of crap, that's a tension that is very, very difficult to fully dissolve, and the book never does that. We can assume that a Hollywood novel, a Hollywood movie, will be some form of compromise, and how you as the author feel about that, well, is bad for the author. But yeah, this is once again where we can see that we always negotiate identity, personhood, negotiate truth, negotiate sincerity under these restricting frames. Capitalism in this case, white supremacy up to a point in this case as well, because shifting from, a Nigerian perspective to American perspective and so forth, all of these are constantly in there, these shifts. And this is kind of where we get to the whole death of the author situation. See, one thing that we need to talk about here is the perspectives in the structure. As I already mentioned, Rusted Robots is written in first person by Ankara, the robot. The interview snippets are all first person by sister, mother, father, all of those people, right? Zelu's story is told in third person. And this is important because what happens here is that we still only get told about the author. The author, Zelu, does never speak to us in first person, except through, possibly, Ankara the robot, which leaves us as, the reader, to do exactly the thing that Death of the Author tells us not necessarily to do, which is try to build meaning out of those two stories that we are getting told both at the same time. And this is interesting for one key reason, because this is all we will ever know about Zelu's life. There is nothing more to be known about Zelu's life but the thing that is in this text. One of the key things that Roland Barthes was talking about is that, if you use authorial intent, there will always be things that you don't know about an author that will impact your reading. And if authorial intent is the one thing that we have, having privileged access to that by virtue of having studied a specific author for a long time or knowing them personally, which, if you are a famous literary critic and the author is still alive and so forth, you have that, which is a form of gatekeeping when it comes to negotiating that meaning between art and artist. And that's what Death of the Author is railing against in a lot of ways. And here, we are doing that because we have all the access to Zelu that there is. And all that Zelu ever speaks to us is spoken through the piece of art within this text. This is like highly fucking meta. And there's another layer of meta over this, because if you know anything about Nnedi Okorafor, the author of the author in this case, and you look at Zelu, there will be parallels between those two characters. Being Nigerian American, or Nai-American as Nnedi Okorafor says, is one of them. Having a disability is another one. Having a background in academia is another one. There are a lot, but there are obviously also very much differences between the two. And the thing that we can do in full confidence when we compare Death of the Author, when we compare Zelu's life to Ankara and Rusted Robots, is not something we can do in the same way with Death of the Author, the novel, and Nnedi Okorafor, the author. But by doing the two things at the same time, we need to once again negotiate here. And I think this is where stuff gets really interesting and where I think the whole thing comes together, at least for me. All art is a collaboration, and all art, like all life, is a negotiation. We are multitudes. We have all these different facets. We, as individuals, want to be who we want to be, but we have limited control over how others see us. This has radically changed what with, social media, curated images and so forth, but we are never fully in control of how others see us, because whenever we do something, we create a form of art. That's the art of life. With every one of those acts of art of life, we become the author of that art. And there's a little death in that, because there is a separation, and once it's out there, others will use that kaleidoscope that we have created by all these different nuances of our life, of our acts and so forth, and they will twist that kaleidoscope and they will get an image, and we have very little control over that image. It's a constant negotiation, and that is where Death of the Author, happens. There's a death of the author, but it's never a full death, and the ending of the book, talking about how creativity flows both ways, is exactly that. It's a collaboration between each and every one of us, with each and every one of us. And sometimes the medium is writing a book, sometimes it's making music, sometimes it's, anything of that. But in a lot of ways, in everyday life, it's just being, talking, working together, and so forth. And what happens in those interstices is beautiful, is powerful, and it's pretty fucking cool. So that's where I want to end this. It's a wonderful book. I really enjoyed it. I got a lot out of it. I will read it again and again and again. We haven't even spoken about how by, being a public figure, being all of these things, you can also become a commodity, being used by the totally not Jeff Bezos to be put into space, to be used by academics and scientists, researchers to promote their research product, starting a company, how you turn yourself into a commodity under capitalism. We haven't even spoken about that in much detail, where you become both the piece of art and the commodity. You have to do all of these things. As I said, this book does a whole lot, and it succeeds on so many levels that it is fucking impressive. I have no idea how something like that can be created. I loved it. It's incredibly powerful. It's going to be hard to push past this in like best books of the year for me. If you have read it, let me know what you thought about it. If you haven't read it, let me know something else. I don't know. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. Please, like, subscribe, share the video, comment, give me money if you feel like it. There's a Patreon, you can become a channel member. You can do all of these things, but mainly read the book, think about it, and keep those thoughts in your mind whenever you interact with other people, how they see you, what they see of you, and try to do the same with them. It may make you a better person, and it may make for better art. And that's the goal of all of this, right? So yeah, thanks and cheers.